Hello and welcome. My name is Walid Mir. I am a Microsoft Technical Trainer here to walk through the Microsoft SC-300 Identity and Access Administrator Associate course with you. Every single day, there are millions of password attacks happening globally. Yes, that's correct. Millions. Every day. And despite all the headlines, as many as 30% of internet users have fallen victim to data breach simply because of a weak password. In fact, the Identity Theft Resource Center's report showed a staggering 211% increase in the breach notification last year alone. Now here's a twist. Despite all the headlines about data breaches, many users skip MFA because it feels inconvenient. And some companies only turn it on after they have already suffered a breach. The result? Attackers don't need to be geniuses. They just need a stolen or guessed password. Well, without MFA, that's often all it takes to walk right in. You're about to dive into the world of Microsoft Entra multi-factor authentication. Password alone just don't cut it anymore. In this session, you'll discover how MFA lets users verify their identity with two or more factors, making it much tougher for attackers to get in. It's quick, user-friendly, and gives your organization a major security boost. Get ready to see how easy it is to protect your account with MFA. Now let's first discuss what is multi-factor authentication and the offerings that Microsoft Entra has for us in MFA. Now to begin, let's have a quick conversation around MFA. Now multi-factor authentication simply means that you are going to use more than one factor to authenticate yourself. Typically, when we talk about multi-factors, we're looking at three key areas to define that. That would be something that you know, and typically this is going to be things that you can remember. For instance, some sort of a PIN, maybe some sort of a password, or maybe a memorable word that you could remember. So something that you know, something that you can memorize, something that you could remind yourself if you needed to. Now, the second factor that we can add along with that could be something that you possess. Now, again, from a lot of different things that we can carry with ourselves, including a mobile phone, a smart card, and similar other devices like a USB dongle or something like a Vido key. So something that you can have. And finally, something that you are. Now, this is where you can look at your facial recognition, your biometrics, your voice recognition, your fingerprint scans. So all the things that define you as a person. Now, looking at the picture on the screen, please make sure you don't confuse yourself. We're not suggesting that you are a machine, right? So that picture has not direct correlation with the diagram that's below or the writing. So please make sure it's relating to something that you are, maybe most likely pointing at a fingerprint or biometric fingerprint scan. Right. Now, typically when we're looking at multi-factor authentication for a very, very long time, it has always been a single factor form that we start off with, where you could start off with a password, a username password, and adding a second factor on top, which would include either a mobile phone or a device. Now, we would like to explore some more details that Microsoft Entra offers us for us to implement this in our environment. Now, let's have a look at the portal quickly to understand some of the options that we have available in Entra. Right, we're back onto Entra portal, back onto entra.microsoft.com, and while I am on my Entra portal, Entra Admin Center, I am simply going to scroll down the blade to look at options for me that has multi-factor authentication right there. Now, in recent changes with Microsoft multi-factor authentication, we can still go to the multi-factor authentication tab in here and see that it has options for me to go and configure or go into the settings for multi-factor authentication. Now, once I click on that and get to the service settings to configure multi-factor authentication, We can see there are recent changes on the portal that suggest that we are now looking at an option to go and configure multi-factor authentication using authentication method policies. So we'll jump onto them just in a second to have a quick look at that. Now, before we do, there is a documentation over here that suggests that we can look at authentication method policies to understand a little bit more about what they are. Now, what I am going to do is quickly going to show you some of this on the portal. But before I do, let's jump onto a quick overview, talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication methods that we have available for us to use. Now, like I was saying earlier, we could typically use password as a primary method to start off the authentication process. Now we can see on the table as a list of options that we have for different options that are available for us to use as a primary authentication method. Now, again, this document can be quite useful for you to get your head around in terms of using multiple options. So please have a look at this document and refer to it, where it suggests where some of these authentication options can be used as primary and or secondary, or maybe not. So you can have a look at these in terms of you planning to implement them in your environment. Now let's get back to the portal for one more time. Now, we were trying to go through to the multi-factor authentication settings. Now we are going to switch to the authentication methods that are available for us to look at under my Entra blade. Now, this is where we can now look at the modern day working with multi-factor authentication methods available for us to configure for users. A user, when logs in for the very first time, is going to be asked to provide some details depending on if they are registered for different features like self-service password reset, or if they are going to be looking at multi-factor authentication. By default, they will be required to register themselves onto the Entra portal. Now, if you have enabled one or more of these options, you could simply ask user to verify them, so they would have options to choose which options they can add as multi-factors. For now, if I look at, apart from just looking at the policies that are listed over here, if I look at some of the options over here, I can see that under my registration campaigns, I have an option to run a campaign. So if I wanted to ask people joining in or signing in for the very, very first time to be able to register themselves to an authentication method, this is where I can run that campaign. Now, for now, Microsoft only offers Microsoft Authenticator as a method to be implemented for all the new users that are going to be signing in for the very first time. Now, in one of the previous sessions, we created a user called Frank Adams, and what we're going to do as part of this demo, we're going to have a look at signing in using Frank Adams' account to see if that actually happens. For me, currently in my Entra setup, I have users that are being asked to sign in. At the very first attempt, they're going to be asked to make sure they are going to register themselves on authentication method. In this case, the Microsoft Entra, Microsoft Authenticator app. So let's have a quick look at that and see how that goes. First of all, let's jump onto the users one more time and call out for Frank. And I'll simply copy Frank's details from here and open a new in private browsing tab. Now let's log into portal.azure.com and sign in with Frank Adam. All right, and if we try to sign in, right, this is the message that we get for the very first time as a login attempt. So it's telling me that the user is being asked to do something additional. In this case, they're asking the account to be kept secure. You need to verify in other ways apart from just the password. So this is where my policy is kicking in to suggest, hey, you're required to now configure another method. So I am being onboarded onto my MFA registration as part of the setup. Now, as soon as the user is asked to configure these details, there are options that we can look at in configuring. By default, the authenticator is available for me to look at. Now, if I suggest that I want to do a different method, which I can click here, it gives me options to look at Microsoft Authenticator or using a phone if I wanted to allow them to use the phone to authenticate themselves as part of that setup. So using the phone call or text messages is one of the default methods that it has built into it to allow people to register onto that, given that you've enabled that for your users and this user is part of that setup. Now, let's stop this at this point. Let's come back out of here. Now, let's go back into the authentication methods one more time to verify some of these details. Now, if I go back and check some of the authentication methods, now if I see very quickly, I can see I have an authentication Microsoft Authenticator enabled for all users and is currently enabled. And I also have my options for SMS available for my all users so they can receive a one-time passcode so they can verify themselves to log into as a multi-factor authentication. So they have some of these options that they can log into to configure. Now, if a user wants to add more than just one method with multi-factor authentication, they can always go into mysignin.microsoft.com. Let's have a quick look at that. All right, I am logged into mysignins.microsoft.com. Now, if I quickly zoom in to show you some of the details. So currently, if I look at my the link that I'm logged into is here, mysignins.microsoft.com. Now, any user in your environment can log into this link and have a look at their profile, including going into the security information that they have for their account. Currently, for the account that I am using, I have registered myself obviously for a password, which I cannot delete, but I can change if I needed to. I have my Authenticator app and my email address configured in here. Now, at some point, we could add other details if there was a requirement for that. So all I need to do here, depending on my authentication methods in Entra, if I have other options available for me to register for myself, I can simply click on Add Sign-in Methods, and I can simply go and add them from in here. Now, I am seeing these methods that are available for me on the screen as additional authentication methods, simply because in my Entra setup, these are enabled, and I am part of that group that this has been enabled for. As a quick check, so if I go back in here, again, if I look around, I have some of the options right over here that are enabled for me, so I can look at and working with those options in my environment. Right, now, in the recent changes, we've also had some other things that have been added onto multi-factor authentication and my SSPR authentication methods. Now, there are a few of these authentication methods that we are looking on at the list that have recently changed. Now, if I quickly jump onto showing some details over here. So there are some methods that we are going to discuss as part of the session now and a bit later, where we can't use some of these options as for multi-factor authentication. So just to quickly check, there are options to use email addresses. And again, this is for email address to receive a message on an email address. Now, typically, this is an external email address to what you currently work with. Now, this is not typically used for multi-factor authentication. This is used for another feature called self-service password resets. Also, currently we have security questions that are available for us as one of the authentication methods. Now, these are not, again, available for you to use for multi-factor authentication. This is used for SSPR only and for non-admins only at this point. You can also create app passwords. And again, this is where you can look at creating passwords for applications that are not web-based and require some sort of authentication to be performed. And in this case, you can create a password for them, so your authentication process allows you to log into them. If multi-factor authentication is required, at least a password to log into them would be required. Apart from that, there are quite a few other authentication methods that are available for us to look at, and we'll have a look at some of these in more detail in one of the next topics. With that, we conclude this module. We encourage you to review the reference modules, check your knowledge with the additional study materials, watch other videos in this course, or search out your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.